Hey there. Tonight, we're stepping into a world that smells like smoke, vinegar, and quiet terror. The streets are narrow, the air is thick, and every window you pass has been nailed shut. Somewhere, a bell tolls. It's not the church calling for prayer. It's the city reminding you that someone else has just died. And you've just been hired as the one person no one wants to see coming down the street. A medieval plague doctor. Now, on paper, it sounds respectable. A physician of the people sworn to fight the Black Death. A professional man, dressed in a long leather coat, carrying mysterious tools and strange authority. But in reality, you wouldn't last a week. Let's set the scene. It's the mid-14th century. Europe is choking on its own mortality. The Black Death has rolled in like fog from the east, and it's moving faster than anyone can bury the bodies. 1 in every 3 people you know will be dead within a year. Maybe more. The priests are terrified, the nobles have fled, and the only ones left to face the dying are you and the rats. When you wake in the morning, assuming you've slept at all, you pull on the uniform that's supposed to protect you. It starts with heavy leather from head to toe, stiff and creaking with every movement. Then gloves, boots, a waxed cloak, and the famous beaked mask. That mask, it's not just for drama. Inside the beak are herbs. Lavender, mint, cloves, sometimes camphor soaked in vinegar. People thought disease traveled through miasma or bad air, so the mask acted as a medieval air filter. In theory. In practice, you're walking through clouds of infection carrying a nose full of rotting flowers. You tighten the leather strap at your neck. You pick up your cane, the long stick used not for walking but for distance. You prod at patients instead of touching them. You lift blankets, point, and gesture with it. The stick is your only friend. When you step outside, the streets are quiet in that strange, thick way that silence has when it's afraid of itself. Doors are shut. Curtains move, then still. You hear someone cough in the distance, and it sounds like the end of the world. Your first patient lies in a small, dark room. The windows are sealed with cloth soaked in vinegar. His family has fled. You can smell death before you see it. The sweetness of rot, the sourness of fever. The man's body is covered in black swellings. Buboes, under his arms and around his neck. They're hot, swollen, pulsing. His eyes have the glassy shine of someone halfway out of the world. You lean closer, the beak making your breathing sound like a broken bellows. You can't help him. You know it. Everyone knows it. But you've been paid, and the city expects you to try. So you do what plague doctors did. You drain the buboes. You press the swelling with your gloved hand, and when it bursts, you wipe the pus with a rag soaked in wine. You sprinkle crushed herbs into the wound and mumble a prayer. It doesn't matter. He'll be dead by morning. You write his name in your book, if he even has one left, and move on. There are 100 more like him waiting. You don't heal, you count. You don't cure, you witness. Your job isn't medicine. It's statistics. By noon, your gloves are soaked with fluids you'd rather not name. The smell clings to you no matter how much vinegar you carry. You pass a priest performing last rites in the street. He doesn't look at you. The two of you are the same now, custodians of death. And here's the part no one tells you. Being a plague doctor didn't mean you were brave. It meant you were expendable. Cities hired plague doctors from other towns, promising high pay and free lodging. They offered hazard bonuses and the vague promise of protection. But in truth, they were sending strangers into neighborhoods already half dead. When the doctor inevitably fell ill, they just hired another. The lucky ones lasted a few months. Most didn't. But let's pretend, for now, that you survived the first week. You learn to ignore the smell, to eat quickly, to keep your gloves on even when you sleep. You stop visiting your own home, if you had one to begin with, and you burn your clothes every few days. Your skin starts to ache from the heat and the leather. You develop rashes from sweat that never dries. At night, you sit by candlelight and read your ledger. The pages fill quickly. So many names. So many homes marked with crosses. You wonder if anyone will ever read this book, or if it'll be burned like the bodies. Sometimes you dream of fresh air, but when you wake, it's always the same stench, the scent of a dying century. You begin to notice strange things. The cats are gone. The rats are bold. The air tastes like iron. The sunsets are darker now, though you can't tell if that's the smoke or your imagination. You used to flinch when you heard the plague bell ringing in the streets. Now it's just background noise. And the worst part? People start avoiding you. Even those who called you doctor last week now cross themselves when you pass. You're not a man anymore, you're an omen. A shape that means sickness. Some children throw stones. Others run. The few who don't are too weak to move. Every time you bend over a patient, you can feel it. This quiet, gnawing dread that maybe this is the one who'll give it to you. The one whose breath will seep through the cracks in your mask. The one whose hand will twitch and brush your sleeve, leaving something invisible that'll follow you home. You tell yourself you're safe. You have the herbs, the cloak, the prayers. But you know better, because every night you cough once, then twice. You tell yourself it's the smoke. You tell yourself you're fine. You tell yourself a lot of things because that's what belief is for. But the truth is simple. No one survived being a plague doctor for long. Not because of the disease alone, but because of what it did to your mind. The loneliness, the fear, the endless counting. You stop seeing people as people. You start seeing them as symptoms. And eventually, when you wake up sweating at midnight, unsure if it's fever or guilt, you realize what every plague doctor learns too late. You weren't healing the sick. You were just buying time before you joined them. And that time is running out. The second week begins the same way the first one ended, with silence. Not peace, not rest. Just the kind of stillness that clings to a dying city like fog. The bells have stopped now, not because there's no one left to die, but because there's no one left to ring them. You step into the street before dawn. The air is damp, sour, heavy with smoke. A few torches flicker where watchmen used to stand, but even they have vanished into quarantine or death. The cobblestones glisten, not from rain, but from the water people throw from their windows, trying to wash the air itself. You remember when people still opened doors for you, called you Master Doctor. They don't now. The moment they hear the creak of your leather boots, they pull back the shutters and hold their breath. You are the plague walking. Your mask lens fogs as you breathe. Inside the beak, the herbs have turned black and damp. You replace them with new ones, rosemary, sage, and mint. But the smell of decay always wins. There's no perfume strong enough to mask despair. You move toward the poorer district, that's where they send you now. The wealthy have fled to their estates. They tell themselves the air is cleaner in the countryside. They don't realize the rats travel too. At the first house, you find a woman sitting beside two small bodies. Her children, both dead, wrapped neatly in linen. She doesn't look at you when you enter. She just asks, softly, "Am I next?" You want to say no. You want to offer something human. But what can you promise? You're a doctor without medicine, a priest without faith. You tell her to drink vinegar water and burn her sheets. It's a performance now, one you both know the ending to. Outside, a man is shouting in the square. He's a preacher or what's left of one. His face is gaunt, his robes filthy, but his voice carries, "The plague is punishment. Confess your sins before it finds you." People gather, half listening, half hoping he's right. Because if the plague is divine punishment, then at least it means someone's in control. The alternative, that it's random, is too terrifying to believe. You don't interrupt. You don't even look at him. You just keep walking. In your satchel are the tools of your trade. A small knife, a jar of leeches, a set of glass vials, a few wax-sealed papers promising payment when the city recovers. You could live 3 lifetimes and still not see that payment. By afternoon, you reach the infirmary. It's not really a hospital. It's a converted warehouse, lined with straw pallets and the faint sound of groaning. The smell hits you before the door opens. Rot, sweat, and the metallic tang of blood. You can't smell anything else for hours after you leave. A younger assistant, barely 16, greets you. He doesn't wear a mask. They've run out. His face is pale, but he smiles, that bright, naive kind of smile that still believes this job is noble. You envy him for that. Together, you make your rounds. You drain buboes, apply vinegar compresses, mutter the same prayers over and over. One man grabs your hand and whispers, "Will it hurt?" You tell him no. You lie. At night, the bodies are carted away. The carts used to creak through the streets every few hours. Bells ringing, voices shouting, "Bring out your dead." Now the carters work in silence. They've grown numb too. You follow one cart just to see. The graveyard outside the city walls is already full. They've started burning bodies instead. The pyres stretch for miles, black smoke rolling into the sky. You stand there for a long time, the heat warming your face through the mask. It's the only warmth left in the world. Later, you return home, or what counts as home. A rented room above an abandoned tavern. You strip off the leather coat and hang it by the window, though there's no wind to dry it. Your hands are blistered from the gloves. Your throat burns from breathing your own air. You open your journal. The candlelight flickers over the pages. You write, "There are fewer bells now, fewer prayers. The sick call for God less often. I think they know he's gone somewhere else." You pause, then add, "Sometimes I cough, only once or twice. It is probably nothing." You close the book. You lie down. You try not to dream, because the dreams always smell like smoke. By the 3rd week, the plague starts killing faster. The priests have stopped visiting. The city guards have sealed the gates. Rumors spread like fever that cats carry the disease, that Jews have poisoned the wells, that the doctors themselves are spreading it. And that's when things turn. One morning, you're walking through the square, and someone throws a stone. It hits your mask with a dull crack. Another follows. A woman screams that you're cursed. A man spits and shouts, "Murderer!" You raise your cane, not in anger but in instinct, to keep them away. The crowd doesn't care. Fear has made them brave. They surround you, shouting, clutching crosses and sticks. You run. The mask rattles against your face as you sprint down an alley. The crowd doesn't follow far. They don't want to touch you. But you hear them shouting long after you're gone. "Death bringer! Plague man!" When you finally stop, your hands are shaking. Not from fear, but from realization. You're no longer the doctor. You're the disease. That night, you remove the mask for the first time in weeks. You stare at it by candlelight. The long beak, the cracked lenses, the straps dark with sweat. It looks less like protection now, more like a confession. You wonder how many doctors wore it before you, and how many lived to take it off. You pour vinegar over your hands. The smell is sharp, cleansing, meaningless. You close your eyes and listen to the city. It's quiet again, too quiet. And for the first time, you think the silence might be waiting for you. The 3rd month comes, though the days all look the same. You've stopped marking them. The church bells are gone. The market stalls abandoned. The air itself smells tired. The city feels hollow now, like a shell. The kind of quiet that suggests not peace, but surrender. You wake before sunrise, as always. Habit, not hope. You don't bother checking the herbs in your mask anymore. They're all just wilted fragments of scent. Lavender, mint, a memory of cleanliness. You still pack your cane, your satchel, your ledger. Rituals keep the mind steady, or at least give the illusion. The streets are emptier than ever. Even the rats have thinned. You see them sometimes, staggering as if drunk, their bellies swollen with what they've eaten. You avoid looking too long. The air feels thick, greasy, as though it's learned to carry sorrow. At first, the plague was something people feared. Now, it's something they expect. Death has become a routine, a daily errand. You notice it in their eyes, that dull, glassy calm that means they've stopped imagining tomorrow. The authorities, those who remain, have changed their orders. You are no longer asked to heal, but to record. Lists, names, causes, streets, numbers. The city wants data, not miracles. It's as though bureaucracy has outlived belief. You keep writing, though your ink is running low. You wonder what happens when the last page is full. Do you stop counting? Or do you start again from the beginning? At the infirmary, the young assistant is gone. His bed is empty, the sheets burned. You don't ask where he went. You already know. The apprentices vanish like candlelight. One breath, and they're gone. A new one has taken his place. A girl this time, maybe 17, with cropped hair and a look that's too steady for her age. She tells you her father was a gravedigger, and that she's used to the smell. You almost smile. Almost. Together, you visit the wards. There's a rhythm to it now: diagnose, drain, record, move on. You say nothing because words take energy you no longer have. At one bedside, a monk grabs your wrist. His skin is cold, clammy, his breath thick with infection. He stares at your mask and whispers, "Do you still believe in healing?" You don't answer. Not because you don't want to, but because you don't know anymore. When he dies, you make a note in your ledger, "Patient, Brother Anselm." Cause, God's indifference. Outside, you find the preacher again, the one who screamed about divine punishment weeks ago. He's thinner now, hollow-eyed, but his voice still cuts through the air. "This is the end," he shouts to a handful of starving faces. "The righteous will be spared. The wicked will rot." Someone in the crowd laughs. Another throws a shoe. Faith, it seems, has started to decay alongside the flesh. You pass him without stopping. You don't tell him that the righteous and wicked look the same on your table. That night, the city tries something new: processions. The priests, desperate to reassert control, order nightly marches through the streets. Long lines of penitents whipping themselves, singing hymns between sobs. They call themselves flagellants. You watch them from a distance. Their backs are raw, their voices cracked. They believe pain will please God, that maybe if he sees enough suffering, he'll turn his face back toward the world. You don't tell them he's already watching, he just isn't answering. But the strange thing is, it works for a while. The people find comfort in it. They can't stop the plague, but they can join it. Participation feels like purpose. Soon, even some of your patients start to refuse treatment, preferring to walk barefoot in the processions instead. They say your herbs are witchcraft, your mask demonic. You try to explain. Infection, air, decay, but your words die in your throat. You sound like a ghost arguing with a sermon. One evening, as you cross the bridge into the merchant quarter, you see a group of flagellants approach. They're chanting in Latin, torches blazing, faces twisted in ecstasy and pain. The leader raises his whip and points at you. "There," he cries, "one of them, a servant of pestilence." The crowd turns. The torches flare. You freeze. Your mask catches the light, that terrible bird-like silhouette, and for a moment you understand why they're afraid. You don't look human. You look like the disease wearing a costume. They rush toward you. You back away, the cane trembling in your hand. Someone grabs your cloak. You twist free, sprinting down the alley, the torches chasing your shadow. The beak rattles with each breath. Your vision blurs from heat and panic. You trip, crash into a doorway, slam it shut behind you. The footsteps fade, eventually. You stay there in the dark, your breath scraping the inside of the mask, your hands shaking. You hear something behind you, a whisper, then another. You turn. There are people inside. A family huddled together in the gloom. You've burst into their home. They stare at you wide-eyed, too afraid to speak. The youngest child begins to cry. You raise your hands slowly. You want to say you mean no harm, but the words don't come. You just nod, open the door again, and step back into the street. You walk until your legs ache. When you finally stop, it's near the city walls. There's a small chapel there, abandoned, the roof half collapsed. You go inside, sit in the dust, remove your mask. The air stings your face like salt. You look at the mask in your lap. It seems to be staring back. And for the first time, you wonder if maybe it isn't keeping the plague out at all. Maybe it's keeping it in. You lean back against the cold stone wall and close your eyes. Outside, the singing continues. Slow, ragged, endless. The city believes it can still be forgiven. You're not sure it deserves to be. Morning arrives like an apology that doesn't change anything. You sit up, joints protesting inside the leather, and try to remember when sleep stopped being rest and became a pause between obligations. Your mask hangs on a nail, a black bird against crumbling plaster. You put it on without thinking. Habit is a kind of anesthesia. The city council has a new plan today. Of course it does. Plans multiply when cures don't. A messenger finds you near the market ruins, thrusts a wax-sealed order into your gloved hand, and scurries off before your shadow can touch him. The document is brave in the way paper likes to be. It demands quarantines, house ceilings, the creation of pest houses beyond the gates. It is very confident about distances. 40 days for ships, 30 for households, endless for the poor. Numbers give frightened people something to hold that isn't each other. You walk the streets with a new job marking. Chalk crosses on doors, red cords tied to handles, a wax seal pressed into softened tallow. Infected. By order. You don't know if the markings save anyone. You do know they make everyone else feel safer. It is easier to fear a symbol than a breath. At the first house, a boy opens the shutter and peers out with one eye, his hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. He sees your mask and retreats as if the window itself has teeth. You tie the cord. He watches through the crack as the red string finishes the sentence his fever started. You leave a jar of vinegar and a prayer card. Neither one is medicine. Both make the council happy. The Carpenters Guild has been hired to build the pest houses, low, fast, and far enough from the city to be comforting but close enough to be efficient. The wood smells new and hopeful. Inside, everything smells old. Straw pallets line the floor in precise rows that pretend to be order. The overseer walks you through the empty aisles and explains where the better sick will lie and where the worse sick will be placed. As if adjectives can disinfect air. You nod. He hands you a set of slate tablets for recording names. Bureaucracy is the only thing that thrives here. By noon, the carts begin arriving. The better sick shuffle into the front room, coughing politely like they're apologizing for the inconvenience. The worse sick are carried past you, eyes half open, already looking at a sky you hope is kinder than this one. You try to keep your ledger neat. The ink bleeds anyway. A woman grabs your sleeve as you pass. She is not old, but the disease has styled her that way. Cheekbones too sharp, lips colorless, eyes glossy with a fever that feels like a secret. I have rosemary, she says, showing you a bundle from the crook of her arm. I have garlic. I boiled vinegar with ash. I burned my mattress and slept on the floor. What did I do wrong? You almost tell her the truth. Nothing. The world did something wrong. It chose to exist. Instead, you say the thing doctors say when truth refuses to be useful. Rest. Water if you can keep it down. I will look in again at dusk. She nods like you've given her a gift. That's the worst part, the gratitude for things that aren't help. Back in the city, rumors work faster than you do. Cats must be killed, someone says, because cats are witches in fur. So cats die and the rats throw a parade. A whisper starts that Jews have poisoned the wells. Guards drag families from homes while the rest of the street watches the way people watch fire from a safe distance. Fascinated, relieved it isn't their house. You try to speak to the captain of the watch. Your mask converts your words into steam. He thanks you for your service and orders more patrols. Cities always prefer visible answers to invisible problems. The apothecary you trusted, an old man with hands that smelled of time and book dust, has a new remedy. He calls it the theriac, a cordial of 40 spices with a price that assumes life has value. He shows you the vial held up to candlelight, and it glows like an idea. You ask whether it works. He stares at the flame for a long time and says, "It is something to swallow that is not fear." You take 3 vials anyway. They are small enough to fit into hope. Your nights have moved to the city wall. You sit with your back against stone that remembers older sieges, and you watch the pest house fires bloom like low stars beyond the ditch. Wind carries the smell of pine resin and what isn't pine. You pull the mask away and let cold air sting your face until guilt reminds you to cover it again. Somewhere in the distance, singing starts up. Another procession. Their hymn is hoarse and earnest. A child's voice tries to rise above the men's and fails adorably. The line disappears around a corner. The sound lingers like incense you didn't approve. You remember a patient who asked if prayer worked better in groups. You said yes because sometimes mercy is a useful lie. On the 4th morning of quarantine duty, you accompany a clerk to seal a baker's shop. The baker's wife meets you with hands still dusted in flour as if normal life could be kneaded into the day by force. Her husband coughs behind a curtain with rhythm and courtesy, apologizing between fits for making a scene. The clerk reads the decree with ceremonial boredom. You affix the wax. The wife nods, swallows, and thanks you for keeping the city safe. You pretend to believe the word safe means anything. Back at the pest houses, the young assistant, your second, has discovered she is useful in ways no manual taught. She knows which window to prop open when breath gets tight, how to lace the mask straps for smaller faces, how to whisper without wasting air. Patients tell her their real names when their fear would have preferred an alias. She writes them in a neat, careful hand. At the end of each list she leaves a space, as if the ledger itself needs room to breathe. You ask her why. She says, "For the ones we missed." You hire her quietly with a city you cannot pay. Superstition keeps growing, water-seeking at every crack logic leaves. A barber surgeon swears by cupping. Another swears at it. A noblewoman sends word that she sleeps each night with a ruby on her tongue and feels improved. You suspect the ruby prefers not to comment. A merchant pays you to stand in his doorway for an hour, mask on, cane visible, so passersby will believe his house is protected by science. You let him overpay you and then give the coins to the pest house, because hypocrisy spends just as well as charity. The council adds new rules while the ink is still wet on the last ones. No funerals, no wakes, no washing of bodies, no bells except for orders. No processions unless explicitly approved by the same people who approved the last procession that turned into a riot. The town crier shouts the decrees to a square that looks away, then coughs, then goes home. You suspect he will be replaced by parchment nailed to doors because parchment can't lose its voice. You start seeing things you didn't before. A priest teaching a child to read from a psalter because classrooms died before the children did. A dog waiting at a closed door for someone who isn't coming back. Then deciding the dirt beside the step is as good a bed as any. A window box still watering itself with a broken gutter. The geraniums stubborn in a way you almost envy. One afternoon, a man arrives at the pest house with a letter of introduction and a face full of certainty. He calls himself a physician, though his hands were recently used for anything but. He proposes a grand experiment. Divide the wards, one treated with your miasma cures, one with his hot and cold method of alternating steam and ice, and a third left to God's will as control. You stare at him through the lens haze until your reflection blurs into his confidence. Then you tell him he can have the third ward if he sleeps in it. He doesn't. He leaves you a pamphlet anyway. You use it to start the evening fire. Your cough returns, politely at first, like a neighbor tapping the wall to ask if you're awake. You count the taps. 3 the first day, 8 the next. The assistant notices and pretends she doesn't. You pretend not to notice her pretending. Courtesy is the last luxury. A guild master bribes you to write that his son died of common fever, not plague, so the family tomb can accept the body. You do it. Not because of the gold, though it will buy wood and vinegar and a week of meat for the pest house, but because the dead boy had a laugh that deserved a gentler adjective. Sometimes mercy is not a useful lie. It is the only one. One evening, the preacher, the thin one with the ruinous voice, comes to find you. He doesn't shout now. He asks for your help. His congregants are dying in the nave despite his best Latin. He wants you to mark the pews with chalk so families can sit apart. You do. He thanks you and asks if God hears through masks. You say yes because you want it to be true for at least one of you. As summer leans toward whatever season the plague allows, the city invents a new word: cleaners. These are men who go house to house after a quarantine expires and scrape the walls with knives to remove invisible corruption. You watch one of them work. Long scraping strokes that fill the room with dust that looks righteous. He finishes, bows, and leaves the white powder in a dignified heap. The family pays him a little and gratitude a lot. You breathe through your beak and say nothing. Sometimes rituals are how a city stops screaming. The assistant falls ill on a Tuesday. You know before she does. Her handwriting tilts. She says she is tired, then sits down in the wrong place and doesn't notice. You move her to the corner bed where the light is kinder and tell her you will be back in an hour, as if schedules matter. She asks you to keep the ledger current. You say you will. She sleeps. You stand in the doorway for a long time, guarding a world you can't defend. At dusk you walk the outer ditch path where the breeze is honest. On one side, fields that remember harvest. On the other, smoke that remembers names. The horizon bruises into violet. Somewhere, somebody laughs. A quick, human sound that startles the evening into admitting it is not entirely lost. You store the laugh the way you store receipts. Back in your room, you remove the mask and set it on the table. It leaves a damp ring like a cup that sweats. You light the candle, open the ledger, and begin to copy names. Your script has simplified itself to survive. A column for the living who might yet return. A column for the dead who already did. Wide spaces between lines, the way you've learned from the assistant, to make room for the ones you didn't reach in time. Your cough visits again, patient as a tax. You count to 9 and then stop counting because numbers never loved anyone back. From the window you can see the chapel with the broken roof. Starlight finds the missing tiles and lays itself down like a blanket too small for the bed. You think of prayer the way a carpenter thinks of wood. Useful if you have the right tools, dangerous when you don't. Quarantine, you realize, was never just a wall. It is a posture, a narrowing of the world into manageable distances. You have quarantined yourself from laughter, from touch, from the kind of memory that smells like bread. You have become the city's necessary absence. And the longer you perform it, the less sure you are there is a door back. You close the ledger. The silence puts its hand on your shoulder the way an old friend does when there are no more clever things left to say. Tomorrow you will tie more red cords. You will move more air with your arms than your cures move with their logic. You will teach the cleaners where to scrape. You will teach the preacher how far apart grief should sit. You will count less carefully and care more quietly. You will take the theriac and feel nothing except a pleasant lie sliding down. You will do your job, because doing it is the only boundary you still believe in. And when the mask goes on in the morning, you will tell yourself what everyone tells themselves when the world is absurd and the work is impossible. It matters because I am here to do it. Then you'll open the door and let the city in. The plague doesn't end so much as it loses interest. It burns until it's bored, until there's nothing left to eat, and then it simply moves on. But you're still here. So is the mask. The air in the city is different now. Stale in a new way, quieter. There are fewer bodies in the streets, fewer carts rumbling through the squares. What's left of the population moves like ghosts, speaking softly, walking around patches of ground where people once stood. The plague has left, but its memory hasn't. You wake late these days. There's no need to hurry. Time itself has slowed. You sit up in bed and watch the dust rise in the light. The sound of your breathing fills the room. Somewhere downstairs, the tavern rats are back. Life, as usual, always returns before decency does. You try to eat, but your body resists. The smell of food reminds you too much of the herbs and vinegar that once filled your mask. You chew a crust of bread and stare at your gloves drying by the window. Outside, the city is beginning to stir again. Markets are reopening. Bells ring, though uncertainly, as if afraid to speak too loudly. Priests hold masses of thanksgiving, thin ceremonies for thinner crowds. And the city council has sent out its new decree. The pestilence is abated. Citizens may resume their trades. God has shown mercy. You read the notice posted on the wall and almost laugh. Mercy is a strange word for survival. You walk the streets, though now you leave the mask behind. People glance at you differently. Without the mask, you're not the omen anymore, you're a reminder. They avert their eyes, pretending not to recognize you. You're not sure you blame them. You wouldn't want to see you either. The pest houses are empty now, though the smell never left. The straw has been burned, the walls scrubbed, the floors sprinkled with ash and lime. You stand in the doorway and listen to the echoes. It's strange. Without the groans and whispers, it doesn't sound peaceful. It sounds lonely. You find your ledger on a shelf where you left it weeks ago. The ink has faded, the pages warped from damp air. You flip through it slowly, names, dates, tiny notes in the margins. You stop on one entry, the girl's name, your assistant. You can't remember what her voice sounded like anymore, only the way her handwriting leaned slightly to the right. You close the book and set it back down. The ledger doesn't need you anymore. It has all the answers it will ever get. That evening, the preacher finds you again. He looks healthier now, which is to say less hollow. The color has returned to his cheeks, though his eyes still have that haunted gleam shared by anyone who's seen too much. He asks if you'll attend the Thanksgiving service. You shake your head. You tell him your work isn't finished. He doesn't press. He only nods and says softly, "Perhaps none of ours ever is." You stay behind as the bells ring. When night falls, you walk to the outskirts where the fields used to bloom. There are no crops yet, just bare soil still recovering. The pyres are cold now, though the wind still carries the memory of smoke. You stand there for a long time, breathing the clean air. It almost feels wrong to breathe without the mask. The stars are visible again. You'd forgotten how many there were. You remember the woman with the rosemary, the monk, the boy behind the shutter. You remember the sound of the bells, the scratch of the chalk, the voices singing in pain and hope. You realize you can remember their faces but not your own. Somewhere, far away, another city is lighting its first warning fires. You can almost hear the whispers traveling down the roads. A sickness has come. You know what that means. The plague isn't gone. It's just changed addresses. And you, what will you do now? The mask hangs by your side like a loyal pet waiting for its next command. You could leave it. You could walk away, start again somewhere that hasn't learned your name. But you already know you won't. Because beneath all the dread, all the superstition and exhaustion, there's still something stubborn beating inside you. Not hope exactly, something quieter. The knowledge that someone has to stay when everyone else runs. Someone has to look at death and keep counting. You take a breath, slow and deliberate. You pick up the mask. The leather is cracked, the lens is scratched, but it still fits. It always will. Tomorrow you'll start cleaning again. Tomorrow you'll check the wells, the rats, the walls. Tomorrow you'll prepare for the next silence. And when it comes, and it always does, you'll be ready to listen. Because that's what plague doctors really were. Not healers, not saviors, not heroes. Listeners. Listening for the breath that falters, the bell that stops, the heartbeat of a world that refuses to die quietly. You pull the mask on one last time. The world smells like herbs and endings. And somewhere in the distance, faint but familiar, a single bell begins to ring again. By autumn, the city pretends to breathe again. Markets reopen, though most of the hands that once exchanged coins now lie beneath the soil. The smell of baking bread returns, faint and hesitant, like a memory trying to remember itself. Bells ring at regular hours again, less for mourning, more for rhythm. The streets sound almost human, almost. You spend your mornings outside the walls now. The fields are full of ash, soft and gray, like the sky itself fell and decided to stay. You kneel, pick up a handful of soil, and let it fall between your fingers. It's too light, too sterile. The earth doesn't trust the living yet. It remembers what we buried in it. Farmers ask if it's safe to plant again. You tell them yes because you've run out of ways to say maybe. They thank you and dig anyway, because hunger listens to no one. You walk past rows of turned soil and think about how the city has turned itself too, over, under, and inside out. Every grave is a furrow now. Every harvest a kind of forgiveness. At night, you return to your room above the tavern. You sit at your table, light a candle, and open your ledger again. Not to record the dead, but to learn from them. You study the patterns. The neighborhoods that suffered most, the timing of the outbreaks, the way the sickness moved like water downhill. You start making notes in a different color ink, hypotheses, small observations, cautious thoughts. You never say the word science out loud. It's not a safe word yet. Sometimes you dream of your assistant. In the dream, she's standing beside your bed, her hands clean, her hair brushed. She says, "You missed one," and points at a blank page. You always wake before you can see what name belongs there. You begin to visit the university again. The halls are quiet, but a few professors have returned, hungry for explanation. They invite you to speak at their gatherings, not lectures exactly, more like confessions of curiosity. You sit in rooms that smell of ink and tallow and talk about what you saw. How the disease spread faster in wet summers, how it slowed near rivers but not wells, how the infected air seemed to travel with the wind. They nod, scribbling. They call you Master Doctor, though you hear the word survivor hiding behind it. One man, thin and eager, shows you a drawing of the human body. Muscles, veins, organs, all labeled with guesses. He says he wants to open corpses to see what's truly inside. You tell him it's dangerous, heretical. You also tell him to be careful with the knife. Cut too fast, and knowledge bleeds away. Medicine is changing, you realize quietly and awkwardly, like a child learning to walk. The plague didn't just kill people, it killed certainty. Faith in the old ways, the humors, the prayers, the stars. In its place, a strange new faith is being born. The faith that truth might be visible if you look closely enough. But even that has a cost. You see it in the eyes of the young physicians who follow you now. They talk about experiments, measurements, evidence. They quote Galen and Avicenna, but they speak with the hunger of people who've seen too much death to believe in tidy theories. They want proof. They want control. They want to make the world behave. You envy them. You also pity them. One evening, a student asks if you believe the plague will return. You tell him yes. He asks how you know. You tell him, because it always does. He writes that down as if it were wisdom. You don't correct him. Let him have his neat answers. They'll crumble soon enough. The council, ever eager to rename its failures as victories, holds a ceremony in the square. They honor the physicians and servants of the city who stood firm in the face of divine trial. They read names from a list, most of them followed by deceased. They hand you a small silver medal. Feels heavy, ridiculous, and vaguely obscene. You thank them anyway. That night, you walk the riverbank with the medal in your pocket. The water moves sluggishly under the bridge. You take out the medal, turn it in your hand, and notice your reflection distorted in the polished surface. For a moment, you see not your face but the beaked mask, gleaming softly in the moonlight. You toss the medal into the river. The ripples erase you politely. The university asks for your notes. You copy them by hand, careful to leave out the parts that sound too much like doubt. You add a final line at the end of the last page. Ignorance is not a sin, but it behaves like one. You start writing more, not for records but for yourself. A treatise, maybe, a diary, a warning. You call it De Contagio et Solitudine, on contagion and solitude. It begins as a medical text and ends as something else entirely. You describe the body, yes, but also the mind, the slow erosion of empathy, the numbness that comes from counting too many deaths, the way silence infects a city faster than disease. No one will publish it, of course. It's too honest. But you write anyway because words are the only clean thing left. As the months pass, the students start wearing versions of your coat. Shorter, neater, less terrifying. They call them protective garments. They call your mask archaic. You don't mind. Let them believe they're safer. Let them pretend knowledge is armor. You know better. Every century invents its own costume of certainty. You keep working, though the city no longer needs you. The new doctors arrive with their instruments and their hope. You help them when they ask, advise them when they listen, watch them repeat your mistakes with better Latin. And still, when the wind shifts and the air grows heavy, you feel it. The faint tremor under your ribs, the whisper of the past. You know what it means. You tell no one. They wouldn't believe you anyway. One evening, as winter approaches, you walk to the pest fields one last time. Snow has begun to fall. Not heavy, but enough to blur the ground's scars. The world looks strangely innocent again. You think of all the graves beneath your feet, the people who will never see this quiet beauty, and you realize something. The plague didn't just destroy, it revealed. It stripped away the lies that kept people comfortable until only the truth was left. Fragile, inconvenient, human. You kneel, press your gloved hand into the snow, and feel the cold seep through the leather. It's cleaner than anything you've touched in months. You whisper, "It's over." The wind disagrees. Winter settles over the city like dust over an old book. Soft, quiet, and a little suffocating. The plague is gone, but its echo lingers in the walls, in the frost on windows, in the way people pause before touching a stranger. The fear doesn't disappear. It just forgets what it's afraid of. You've taken to writing late into the night. The candle burns low, dripping wax like slow punctuation onto the page. The treatise is growing longer than you intended. At first, it was meant to be an anatomy of disease. Then it became an anatomy of people. Now, it's an anatomy of everything that went wrong. You write about the masks, the myths, the mistakes. You write about the difference between dying and giving up. You write about the silence that spreads faster than infection, about how cities can go mad politely. You try not to sound bitter, but the ink keeps turning darker anyway. Word of your writing spreads, quietly at first like gossip. The younger doctors at the university whisper that you've written something dangerous, that you've questioned divine order, that your words might be contagious in their own way. You take that as a compliment. Then, one morning, a messenger from the city council arrives with a summons. You're to appear before them to discuss the nature of your recent observations. You know what that means. They've found out about de contagio et solitudine. You put on your coat but leave the mask behind. The air is cold, crisp, clean enough to trust. As you walk through the square, you notice how people have begun to rebuild their rituals. The market women argue over prices again. The baker's ovens smoke. A juggler performs for children who don't yet remember fear. The world, as always, pretends it never fell apart. The council chamber smells of ink and anxiety. The men sitting before you wear the same robes they did during the plague, but their faces are rounder now, safer. They speak in that careful, official tone people use when they want to sound like they're not angry. They ask if it's true you've written that disease isn't punishment, that contagion isn't moral, that death doesn't discriminate between the wicked and the righteous. You tell them yes. They ask if it's true you wrote that the church failed to save the city. You tell them no. Then you tell them it didn't have to. They don't like that answer. One of them leans forward, his gold chain gleaming in the candlelight, and asks if you think you know better than God. You pause. You look at your hands. You say quietly, "I think I've met him." He was silent. The room freezes. Then someone coughs. Then someone else mutters something about blasphemy. You're dismissed before you can say anything else. Outside, snow is falling again. It sticks to your gloves, melts against your skin. You walk back through the same streets you once marked with red cords. The doors are clean now, the symbols gone. The houses look innocent, as if they've never heard of you. When you reach your room, you find the door slightly open. Inside, the air smells of cold iron. Your desk has been disturbed. The treatise is gone. You sit down and stare at the empty space where it was. The candle guttering beside it seems to apologize. You know who took it. The council, or maybe the university, or maybe both. Someone will copy it. Someone will hide it. Someone will read it in secret years from now, when it's safe to think again. You don't panic. You just sit there, hands folded, feeling strangely light. The weight of the book is gone, but not its contents. They live in you now. You've memorized too much of it to ever lose it completely. Over the next few weeks, small things start to happen. Students you've never met stop you in the street, asking for advice, for stories, for fragments of what you wrote. They call you master again, though not in the same tone. There's curiosity in it now, not reverence. The kind of curiosity that used to get people burned. You tell them pieces, the safe pieces. You leave out the parts that make them doubt the things they still need to believe. But word keeps spreading. Copies of your notes appear in other cities, Pisa, Venice, Prague. Most are incomplete, rewritten, misquoted, mistranslated. Some are signed with your name. Others are credited to saints or scholars you've never met. It doesn't matter. Ideas don't care who carries them. You start receiving letters. Some from other doctors, thanking you for your courage. Others from priests, condemning your heresy. A few from patients who survived, though you don't remember their faces. They write to tell you that they still pray for you. That's kind, you suppose. Misguided, but kind. One evening, a young monk visits you. He's carrying a copy of your treatise, bound in rough leather. He tells you it's being passed from monastery to monastery, hidden among theological texts. They say you've written about the truth of suffering, he says softly, that you've seen God's anatomy. You laugh. You tell him if he finds it to let you know what it looks like. He doesn't understand. Or maybe he does. After he leaves, you walk down to the river again. The snow has turned to slush. The water runs high, carrying debris from the upper city. You watch a piece of wood float by, spinning slowly, disappearing under the bridge. You imagine your book traveling the same way, caught in currents you can't control, destined for shores you'll never see. For the first time, you feel something like peace. Not joy, not pride, just acceptance. You did what you could. You wrote it down. The rest belongs to the world now. That night, you sit by the window, mask beside you, and listen to the wind. It sounds almost like the low, steady breathing of a sleeping city. For once, you don't feel the need to count it. You realize something simple, something you'd been too tired to notice before. Survival isn't about avoiding death. It's about refusing to look away from it. You close your eyes. The wind carries faint voices. Children laughing, hammers striking, bells ringing somewhere far away. Life, stubborn and ordinary, is winning again. You smile, though no one can see it. You pick up the mask, turn it in your hands, and whisper, "We did what we could." It's not forgiveness, but it's close. Spring comes again, though you can't tell at first. The snow melts into the soil, and the air smells faintly of rot and thawing things. Life, it seems, has a short memory. Trees bud where the fires once burned. Children play in the same streets that once carried the dead. The city has forgiven itself faster than you ever could. You hear about it from travelers first, the rumors. A scholar in Venice quoting your words on contagion. A physician in Paris claiming to have found proof that disease travels through invisible seeds. A monk in Prague whispering that God works through natural causes, not against them. Each story arrives changed, misremembered, like your handwriting translated by fever. But you recognize the bones of it. The world has begun to speak your language, even if it doesn't know your name. You try not to care. You tell yourself you're finished with ideas. Yet every time you hear one, a strange warmth flickers behind your ribs, something dangerously close to pride. The university reopens in full that year. Bells ring to announce the return of study. The plague has made scholars into celebrities. Men who survive not through faith, but through logic, chance, or both. Students flock to learn how not to die. Medicine is suddenly fashionable. You're invited to teach, though you decline at first. The thought of standing in a room full of eager faces feels exhausting. But they insist. The rector himself visits you, bearing wine and politeness. He tells you the city owes you more than silver can repay. You tell him cities don't owe anyone anything, they just forget slower. He laughs anyway and leaves a sealed invitation on your table. The lecture hall smells of ink, candle smoke, and ambition. You stand at the front, the students watching, quills ready. For a moment, you forget what words are for. Then you begin, not with anatomy, not with treatment, but with observation. You tell them how to see. You speak of noticing patterns. Where the wind blows, how the air changes, which streets die faster. You tell them that the body is not a battlefield, but a landscape. They write it down as if it were scripture. You warn them not to trust what they've been taught about humors and balance, about God's punishments or celestial influences. You tell them to trust what they can smell, hear, and count. You tell them that ignorance is not sin, it's soil, and that knowledge, when it grows, smells a little like decay. Some of them flinch, some nod. One young man in the front row meets your gaze without fear. You recognize that look, the dangerous curiosity that refuses to die even in plague years. You wonder how long he'll last before the church notices him. Afterward, the students file out, whispering. The young man lingers. He asks if he can study under you. You tell him there's nothing left to study. He smiles in that way youth does, believing every refusal is just a test. He'll come back tomorrow, you know. They always do. Over the next months, you start teaching regularly. Small gatherings at first, then larger ones. The hall fills. People stand in the aisles. You speak about air, water, contagion, cleanliness. You demonstrate how to disinfect with fire, how to wash tools, how to seal wounds. They watch, entranced. You realize you've become what you used to despise, a source of comfort. You suppose there are worse fates, but progress never moves quietly. The church grows restless. Priests preach about the dangers of human pride. Pamphlets circulate claiming scholars are rebuilding Babel with ink. They remind the faithful that plague is God's reminder, not man's experiment. You've seen this pattern before. Fear dressed in faith always looks the same. One evening, a messenger arrives at your door again, this time not from the council, but from the bishop. A summons. You're to appear before an ecclesiastical tribunal to answer for doctrinal improprieties. You laugh when you read it. You didn't think they still had the energy. The trial is held in the cathedral because of course it is. The stained glass glows with the last light of day. Saints watching from above like bored witnesses. The bishop sits high in his chair, his rings gleaming. You stand below, your boots echoing on the stone floor. He begins politely, as they always do. He praises your service during the pestilence, your dedication to the suffering. Then his tone sharpens. He accuses you of writing that sickness comes from the body, not the soul. He accuses you of undermining the church's authority by claiming to see the workings of God through the eyes of man. He says this as if reason itself were an act of rebellion. You listen quietly. When he finishes, you say, "My Lord, I've seen too much to believe that ignorance is holy." The silence that follows is thick enough to touch. He warns you that humility is a virtue. You nod. You say, "So is truth." That ends the conversation. They don't imprison you. They don't need to. You're too old for exile to matter. They simply declare your writings dangerous to the simple-minded and forbid further lectures until the matter is reviewed. You thank them for their time and walk out into the night, the cathedral doors closing behind you like a final diagnosis. The next day, the students come to your house. They bring notes, questions, copies of your treatise smuggled from city to city. They tell you they'll continue your work. You believe them. They have that look again, the one that doesn't understand how sharp truth's teeth can be. You teach them quietly, in the evenings, with shutters closed and candles shielded. The lectures become conversations. Conversations become experiments. You build small furnaces for purifying instruments, jars for studying rot. You find beauty in the discipline of it, the slow, patient search for reason amid decay. Sometimes, late at night, when the room grows quiet, you think of the plague again. You wonder if all this effort, these lectures, these arguments, these sparks of new science, will mean anything when the next one comes. You know it will come. The wind is already learning the scent of death again. But maybe, just maybe, when it does, someone will be ready. You write one last entry in your journal. The body is fragile. The mind is stubborn. Between them, the world endures. You close the book. Outside, you hear laughter, students leaving, arguing about something that matters too much to them now and will mean nothing in a year. It's a good sound, a human sound. You let it fill the room. The plague took everything from you once, certainty, faith, even your name. But it gave you something rarer in return. The knowledge that survival isn't triumph and ignorance isn't safety. It gave you the understanding that the world moves not because it's just, but because it refuses to stop. You look at the mask hanging by the window. The leather is cracked, the beak bent slightly to one side. It looks smaller now somehow, or maybe you've just outgrown it. You pick it up not to wear, but to hold. It's lighter than you remember. Maybe it always was. Time has a strange way of healing. It doesn't fix things, it just teaches the world to stop pointing at them. By the next spring, your name has faded from the cathedral whispers and reappeared in student debates. The bishop no longer sends letters. The city has found new scandals. Life as usual has moved on. But knowledge, like infection, travels even when no one wants it to. Your students have scattered, north to Prague, west to Paris, east toward forgotten monasteries where parchment is safer than people. Each writes to you in code, half out of caution, half out of habit. One signs his letter from the place where the air smells of salt, and describes a small hospital near the sea. He writes of boiling instruments before surgery, of washing hands between patients. He says it's working. You smile. You imagine the salt in the air disguising the smell of antiseptic. Another student writes from Venice. He's experimenting with airflow in closed rooms, building wooden contraptions to test how bad air travels. He doesn't use your name, but he thanks the man with the mask for teaching him how to look. You trace the words with your finger. The ink smudges. Maybe that's what survival really is. Ideas written on surfaces too fragile to last, but passed along before they fade completely. You, meanwhile, are aging out of the century. Your hands shake when you write. Your eyes blur in candlelight, but your mind won't quiet. It hums with memory. The faces of the dying, the songs of the flagellants, the color of the sky the day the bells stopped. You think of them not with fear anymore, but with familiarity, like neighbors you still greet even after moving away. You still keep the ledger by your bedside, though the names inside have become ghosts of ghosts. Sometimes you read them aloud, slowly, like a prayer. It reminds you that each number in a death toll once had a heartbeat. The world forgets that part too easily. One afternoon, you visit the university again. You walk the courtyard where the plague once burned through bodies and books alike. The stone benches are warm in the sun. A group of students sits beneath a tree, arguing about something you can't hear. Their laughter drifts across the square like birdsong. You stand there unseen, listening. It's strange. Laughter used to sound disrespectful to you. Now it sounds like defiance. Inside, the lecture halls have changed. The chalkboards are cleaner, the walls freshly plastered, the shelves heavier with new books. The professors now quote theories instead of prayers. They dissect cadavers without apology. They call diseases by Latin names, as if renaming them makes them less cruel. You watch a young doctor demonstrate the structure of a lung to a crowd of apprentices. He points to the drawing and says, "Life is breath, and breath is shared." He doesn't know it, but he's repeating your words. You leave quietly, because ghosts shouldn't applaud. That night, you dream again, this time of the pest house. But it's clean, silent, full of sunlight instead of coughing. The straw beds are gone. The assistant is there, younger than ever, writing neatly in her book. You ask her what she's writing. She says, "The living." You wake with tears you don't remember starting. You try to sleep again but can't. So you walk. The city is quiet at this hour, the streets glistening from rain. The moon turns every puddle into a mirror. You pass by the cathedral, its great doors locked, the gargoyles staring down as if still on duty. For a moment you think about stepping inside, saying something to the silence. But there's nothing left to confess. You've already spoken all your heresies out loud. You keep walking until you reach the river. It's higher now, swollen with melted snow. The bridge creaks under your feet. You lean over the rail, watching the water rush below, brown, fast, alive. Somewhere in that current, your silver medal still rests, perhaps lodged between stones, perhaps melted by time. The idea comforts you. Even medals decay. You return home to find a visitor waiting outside your door. It's the young man from your lectures, the one with the sharp eyes and sharper questions. He's older now, with streaks of gray in his hair and the posture of someone who has seen his own share of horrors. He smiles when he sees you. "Master," he says softly, "I came to tell you, it's spreading." You blink. "The plague." He shakes his head. "Your work." He tells you of hospitals built on new principles, cleaner, brighter, with windows for air and drains for filth. Of physicians sharing knowledge instead of secrets. Of students arguing not over scripture but over experiments. He tells you that in Florence they've begun keeping records, your kind of records, names, symptoms, patterns. Data, he calls it. He laughs at the word. It's your handwriting, but neater. You listen, hands folded, heart heavy in the best way. Then he hesitates. There are still those who call it heresy. They say we're interfering with God's will. You smile faintly, then tell them we're improving his handwriting. He laughs, a full, unguarded sound, and for a moment you see what the world might look like without fear. When he leaves, he presses a small package into your hand. Inside is a book, bound in dark leather. The title reads, "On the Breath of the Living." You open it and see words that feel familiar. Not yours exactly, but echoes, ideas translated, refined, reborn. You realize you're reading the next generation's version of your own thoughts. You feel something you didn't expect. Relief. The work no longer belongs to you. It never did. Days turn into weeks. The world outside grows restless again. Rumors of plague in the east, of ships quarantined at sea. You hear the bells, faint and far away, and you know. You've seen this pattern before. The century is turning, but the cycle never ends. You find your mask where it still hangs by the window, gathering dust. You wipe it clean. The leather is stiff, the lens is clouded. You hold it to your face for a moment, breathing in the faint scent of herbs and smoke. It feels like shaking hands with an old enemy who once saved your life. You know you're too old to face another outbreak. Your body wouldn't survive it, but you also know someone will. Someone young, stubborn, curious. Someone who's read your words or heard your story or seen a mask in a painting and wondered who wore it first. That's enough. You sit at your desk one last time. The candle burns low. You take a clean sheet of paper and write slowly, carefully, though your hand trembles. To whoever finds this, the world will end many times before it truly ends. Each time, the living will bury the dead, curse the heavens, and then, without permission, begin again. When that happens, remember, fear is the oldest contagion. Cure that first, and the rest will follow. You sign it simply with no name, just a small drawing of a beaked mask. Then you close the book and blow out the candle. The room fills with the sound of the river outside, the whisper of wind through the shutters, the breathing of a city that refuses to die. You lean back in your chair, eyes half closed, and for the first time in years you let yourself rest. The mask stays on the table, watching, waiting, knowing as you do that sooner or later someone will need it again. Decades pass. The city changes its skin again. The plague is a rumor now, half history, half bedtime story told to frighten children into washing their hands. The fields are green once more, the bells ring for weddings instead of funerals, and the pest houses have been turned into grain stores and stables. But sometimes, when the wind blows from the east, people swear they can still smell smoke and vinegar. Memory, after all, never learned how to die properly. You are gone, of course. Time eventually finished what the plague began. But your name, what's left of it, travels. It drifts on parchment, slips into conversation, mutates in translation. Dr. Nigromantis, the beaked healer, the masked saint of pestilence. Every generation renames you, reshaping the truth to suit whatever story they need to tell about fear and faith. In Florence, a painter sketches your silhouette into the corner of a fresco, a dark figure standing apart from the crowd, half halo, half shadow. In Paris, a playwright writes you as a tragic philosopher, half mad, half visionary. In London, a bookseller sells a pamphlet claiming your mask could purify air and banish demons. It becomes a superstition before it ever becomes history. The students who once sat at your lectures grow old, too. Some become teachers themselves. Some die quietly, others noisily, but all of them carry the echo of your words. They argue about whether you were right, that disease follows air and filth, not fate. They argue in Latin, in French, in words you never learned. But still they argue, and that's how the world moves forward. Disagreement disguised as progress. The church eventually forgives you in the way institutions forgive all heretics, by pretending you were always on their side. A century later, they'll quote your theories as examples of divine inspiration. No one will mention the trial or the missing manuscript, or the nights you spent washing your hands in cold water because you didn't know what else to do. The mask, though, the mask survives. It ends up in a cabinet first, then a chest, then a merchant's collection. Decades later, someone finds it and decides it's art. It travels from one noble's curiosity cabinet to another, gathering dust and legend along the way. Each owner gives it a different story. Some say it belonged to a healer who spoke with angels. Others say it was worn by a madman who tried to resurrect the dead. A few simply call it the bird of death. The truth, as always, doesn't get an invitation. By the 17th century, artists have fallen in love with your image. Painters add the beaked mask to their plague scenes, tall and ghostly amid the chaos. The detail spreads through Europe like rumor, first in Venice, then Amsterdam, then beyond. Soon every depiction of plague has a doctor in black, his eyes hidden behind glass, his face long and inhuman. They say it's protection. They say it's fear. They're both right. Centuries turn. Medicine advances. Germs get names. Vaccines get invented. Death gets paperwork. The world becomes cleaner, brighter, and much more certain. People laugh at the mask now, calling it primitive, absurd, theatrical. They display it in museums behind glass, lit by soft lamps. Children press their noses to the case and giggle. Their teachers explain that it was once believed bad air caused disease. The children wrinkle their noses. They think they're smarter than the past. But somewhere, in the quiet corners of those same museums, an older visitor stares at the mask a little too long. Maybe it reminds him of something. A hospital corridor, a siren, a white coat, and a smell of disinfectant. He doesn't laugh. He reads the little plaque that says Plague Doctor, 14th century, and thinks about how the world always circles back to its fears. Then he moves on because history only allows brief visits. In time, the mask becomes a costume. Festivals adopt it. Carnival performers wear it for fun, not fear. They add color, gold leaf, feathers, embroidery. What was once armor against death becomes decoration for pleasure. The beak, once stuffed with herbs, now glitters with sequins. The air inside it smells not of decay but of perfume. The irony is complete. Humanity, it seems, has forgiven the plague by turning it into entertainment. Yet even in celebration, the mask keeps its silence. It watches from the faces of dancers and revelers, its hollow eyes reflecting torchlight. It remembers what the people wearing it have forgotten. That laughter and panic often share the same heartbeat. A century later, a writer in England finds an old engraving of the mask and becomes obsessed. He writes a story about a doctor who tries to save a dying city but ends up cursed to wander it forever. The story spreads, changes, mutates again. The doctor becomes a symbol, the man who looks at death too long and becomes part of it. The world loves that kind of tragedy. It's tidy, and tidy stories are easier to carry. By the time the next great sickness comes, cholera, influenza, things that travel by ship instead of prophecy, your image returns. Posters show plague doctors warning people to wash, to cover, to hide. The black silhouette becomes shorthand for contagion itself. A warning more effective than any sermon. And in the quiet corners of libraries, scholars still argue over your existence. Was there one doctor or many? Was the mask your design or just a symbol of something larger? They debate as if deciding the truth will disinfect the past. But truth, as you once knew, doesn't behave that neatly. Meanwhile, outside, the air changes again. Another century, another fever. The streets grow empty, the windows glow. People hide indoors, listening to the world cough. The words are new, virus, quarantine, lockdown, but the rhythm is old. They wear masks again. Not leather, not beaks, but cloth and glass and plastic. They wash their hands and avoid each other. And someone somewhere jokes that they look like plague doctors. You'd laugh if you could. You'd recognize the pattern. You'd whisper, "I told you it never ends." But the world doesn't need your whisper anymore. It carries your lesson in its reflexes, in the way people distance, disinfect, and still find time to hope. It's the same faith you once clung to, the same superstition disguised as science. That if we keep busy enough, if we wash enough, if we wear the right things, maybe we'll earn another sunrise. That's what you were really teaching all along, wasn't it? That survival isn't an act of defiance. It's just repetition. The candle burns out. The mask sits quietly in its case, watching. It's seen centuries of breath and silence, fear and laughter. It's seen the world burn, rebuild, forget, and start over. It doesn't need to speak. It knows that one day, when the air grows heavy again, someone will remember. Someone always does. And when that day comes, the old, familiar ritual will begin once more. Slowly, politely, inevitably. Masks will go on. Bells will ring. The living will count. And history will cough itself awake. By the time the 18th century arrived, the mask had become folklore. No longer a tool, no longer even a memory, but a story whispered in candlelight. Every generation inherited it like an heirloom, unwanted, half-believed, but impossible to throw away. They told it to children who laughed, and to adults who pretended not to listen. The story always began the same way. There was once a doctor who could not die. In taverns and alleys, he was said to wander still, his black cloak fluttering just beyond the edge of lamplight, his glass eyes catching moonlight like coins. He appeared when sickness returned, they said, to count the living before death could. Some called him a savior, others, a curse. Both agreed he was a reminder that death could wear a man's shape if it wanted to. And maybe that was the point. In Venice, gondoliers swore they saw him gliding through the fog, his mask just visible between arches of the Grand Canal. In London, mothers warned their children to behave, or the beaked man would come to carry them off to his hospital under the bridge. In Bavaria, the story softened. He became a weary angel who collected the souls of plague victims so gently they never noticed leaving. You, of course, were long gone, but your shadow had learned to travel on its own. By the Enlightenment, people began to romanticize the plague doctor. They turned him into a kind of Gothic saint, half scientist, half martyr. Writers painted him as the last man who dared to look at death without blinking. Artists loved the symmetry of it. A healer dressed like a specter. They called it irony, you would have called it honesty. Painters filled their canvases with your likeness. The narrow silhouette, the gleam of brass-rimmed lenses, the hands gloved and patient. In some works, you stand amid ruins, haloed by candlelight. In others, you move through a crowd of the dying, untouched, part savior, part shadow. The eyes of the mask, those hollow, unblinking circles, became symbols of rational detachment, of science watching suffering without flinching. You'd have smiled at that. Detachment, you knew, was just another name for exhaustion. Some artists gave you companions, a child following at your heels, a ghostly nurse holding herbs, a crow perched on your shoulder as if recognizing kin. Others stripped you of context entirely, leaving only the black outline against a red or gray sky. The image worked because it didn't explain itself. A century obsessed with reason needed a reminder that mystery was still breathing. Then came the philosophers. They adored you. To them, you weren't a man at all but an idea, proof that knowledge could survive horror. They wrote about you as if you were a metaphor for enlightenment itself. The human will standing upright in a world rotting at its feet. A noble illusion, maybe, but one that printed well in books. Meanwhile, the real descendants of your work, physicians, natural philosophers, and apothecaries, kept on dissecting, recording, classifying. They built hospitals, universities, and morgues, each with a foundation stone laid in plague years. And on the walls of some of those places, tucked into dusty archives, your beaked face lingered in sketches and marginalia. You became both myth and method, a cautionary tale and a curriculum. The irony is that no one could decide if you were a hero or a fool. Some writers described you as a saint of suffering, one who sacrificed sanity for the sick. Others claimed you were a symbol of arrogance, proof that humanity always believed it could bargain with death. Both stories thrived. Both sounded right depending on how the wind was blowing. And through it all, the mask endured. In the 1700s, collectors began hoarding relics of old medicine, saws, scalpels, leech jars, and plague masks. They kept them in glass cases, curiosities from an age when ignorance wore courage like perfume. Wealthy families showed them off at dinner parties, letting guests peer into the hollow beak and imagine what kind of man would wear such a thing. No one ever guessed it was once worn by someone very tired, not very brave. By the 1800s, your image had become pure theater. The Romantic poets wrote odes to you. The Gothic novelists turned you into a tragic figure, a man cursed to heal the unhealable. Some even claimed you sold your soul to death itself, bargaining for the knowledge to save others. Death, being practical, gave you time instead. And as centuries rolled on, the mask became more famous than the man. Scholars argued about the design. Was it truly yours? Was it Venetian? Did it ever work at all? They drew diagrams, measured replicas, debated airflow and anatomy. None of them understood that the mask wasn't about protection. It was about permission. It let men look at horror without losing themselves in it. It made fear wearable. By the dawn of the 20th century, the plague doctor was no longer history. He was iconography, a symbol of dread, reason, and endurance all at once. When war returned to Europe, posters resurrected your silhouette again, this time as propaganda. The enemy was the disease now, invisible and moral. The world had learned to medicalize its metaphors. But somewhere under all the symbolism, the truth still whispered quietly. You were just a man with a job, a frightened, stubborn man trying to count heartbeats faster than silence could. And the mask, whatever else it became, was a memory of that. When the modern world built its museums, your likeness became an exhibit. The plaques used words like protection, symbolism, innovation. Visitors nodded, took pictures, and moved on. But once in a while, one stayed, a nurse, a scientist, a weary doctor on a day too long, and looked at the mask not as history but as recognition. You can almost hear them think it. We still wear it, don't we? Just invisible now. And if ghosts could smile, you would. Because that's what history does. It forgets details and remembers meanings. It turns exhaustion into courage, fear into ritual, mistakes into progress. The world will always find new names for the same old helplessness. And every time it happens, every time a disease crosses borders, every time a city falls quiet, you'll walk again through its dreams. Not as a man anymore, but as the outline of one. Black coat, glass eyes, the shape of reason in a world that doesn't know what to believe. That's all legend really is. A memory that refuses to stay buried. By the time the 20th century began to hum with engines and electric light, the plague doctor had become something else entirely. An image too old to be feared, too familiar to be forgotten. He existed somewhere between nightmare and nostalgia. Painters revived him again, but not as healer or specter. They painted him as conscience. The black figure with the bird's beak appeared amid factories and trenches, a shadow watching smoke rise from new machines that looked suspiciously like furnaces. They said he symbolized science gone blind. They said he was reason wearing regret. You, if you'd been there, would have said he was simply tired again. The world was learning new ways to die. Not by pestilence this time, but by its own cleverness, gas, bullets, noise. And yet, even in this bright, mechanical century, your ghost found work. Whenever fear outpaced understanding, your silhouette flickered at the edge of things. During influenza outbreaks, your face appeared in newspapers, old drawings reused as decoration beside headlines that still didn't know how to explain panic. The editors printed your image because it looked safe, old, and strangely polite. Death in your shape had manners. Then came the psychologists. They loved symbols the way priests once loved relics. They called your mask a projection, fear externalized, protection against the unbearable. They said the beak was not for breathing clean air, but for creating distance. The glass eyes turned inward, reflecting the self, not the world. They said every doctor, every scientist, every man who hides behind knowledge wears your mask. You would have agreed quietly. They were late to the diagnosis. In time, the museums became cathedrals for what the living wanted to believe about the dead. Glass cases displayed your instruments. The cane, the gloves, the little pouches of herbs turned to dust. Visitors stared as if reverence could sterilize history. They whispered the same thing people once muttered in plague years: how did anyone survive this? And never realized they were asking the wrong question. Survival, you always knew, was rarely a matter of how. It was a matter of who. The world learned to be clinical about its fears. It invented laboratories instead of altars, diagnoses instead of confessions. But when the air turned bad again, smog, fallout, new contagions, the reflex was the same. Masks, distance, disinfectants, the ritual choreography of hope. Humanity, rehearsing for its next panic, still bowed in the same rhythm. Then came the artists again, the ones who felt too much. They brought you back in colors too bright for tragedy. Pop art turned your mask into merchandise. Stage plays made you a tragic philosopher. Filmmakers painted you in chiaroscuro, wandering alleys of fog with a lantern that never goes out. You became performance, fear made fashionable. At masquerades, the wealthy wore you without irony, your long beak carved from gilt wood. They laughed, drank, posed for portraits. The irony was perfect. Once the mask kept death out, now it kept meaning out. People wore it to feel safe from sincerity. But something about the shape still worked. The hollow eyes, the silhouette that looked more like a question than a person. Even centuries later, people who saw you on a stage, a screen, a postcard, felt something cold move under the ribs. The body remembered what the mind forgot. You didn't have to explain yourself anymore. In quiet corners of cities, your image started appearing again. Graffiti on brick walls, murals in alleyways. Sometimes alone, sometimes beside words. We never learn. Some nights, someone would paint your outline holding flowers instead of a cane. Other nights, you were painted as the last witness, standing beneath fluorescent light in a modern hospital corridor. Always watching, always waiting, and then one year the world stopped again. Planes grounded, streets emptied. The invisible enemy came not from sin or prophecy, but from breath. The people, modern and enlightened, rediscovered quarantine, fear, isolation. They washed their hands the way you once did. They counted numbers the way you did. They learned what you knew. That silence can be contagious. And when the fear grew heavy, your shape returned once more. Artists drew you again, the beaked mask watching from screens and walls, a symbol of endurance in latex and glass. Journalists used your image in headlines about the new plague, children dressed as you for festivals that were no longer quite jokes. The world needed you again, not as doctor, but as mirror, because the truth had never changed. It wasn't about medicine or divine wrath. It was about the human need to hide while still watching, to cover the face and keep the eyes open. In a way, you were never a symbol of death at all. You were a symbol of endurance, of the strange, trembling genius of humanity, the ability to walk straight into fear wearing a disguise of understanding. You became our reminder that reason is just another mask, and beneath it, we are all still guessing. Centuries had sanded you down to simplicity. No longer a man, no longer a profession, just an outline, a posture, a question. What do we do when the air itself turns against us? We cover our faces. We count the living. We tell stories about a doctor who refused to die. The psychologists were right. You weren't just a relic of the Middle Ages. You were anatomy drawn on the human condition. Every age builds its own beak, fills it with new herbs, faith, logic, technology, and hopes the scent will hide the smell of fear. You never vanished because you never belonged to one time. You were what the living invent when they need to keep going. And so the museums still light your case every morning. The tourists still stare. Some lean closer to the glass, trying to see what kind of face might have fit inside that darkness. They always expect something monstrous or holy, but you know better. The face beneath the mask was never either. It was just tired, determined, ordinary, and that perhaps is why it still matters. In the end, every era discovers its own plague, some with coughs, others with loneliness. The symptoms change, but the behavior doesn't. People still reach for something to wear between themselves and the world. Cloth, faith, work, screens. It's all the same instinct dressed differently. And somewhere in that reflex, your outline still lingers. The museums don't call you by name anymore. They just call you anonymous 17th century physician. A description polite enough to erase the person. But visitors linger anyway, looking at your beaked mask the way people look at old maps, half fascinated, half afraid of getting lost in it. They read the plaque, they nod, they move on. Yet sometimes, one pauses just a little too long, and you can almost hear their unspoken question. Who did he think he was saving? If they asked you, you'd have told them the truth. You weren't saving anyone. You were buying time, because sometimes time itself is the cure. Not the kind that heals, but the kind that lets the world find its balance again. That's the quiet truth the legends leave out. The masks, the rituals, the long nights counting the dead. They were never about conquering the plague. They were about surviving the waiting. Humans need to do something while fear decides what it will take. Centuries later, psychologists would write papers about coping mechanisms, as if the mind were a clock with predictable gears. They'd talk about projection, repression, displacement, all those tidy words that try to domesticate panic. They never realized you'd already practiced all of them in the mirror every morning before tying your mask straps. The modern world has its own versions of your uniform. White coats, safety goggles, plastic gloves. The same ritual, a little cleaner, a little brighter. A new vocabulary. Sterile instead of pure, clinical instead of holy. People still whisper the same phrases though. Stay safe. Wash your hands. Pray it passes. They believe their era is smarter, but fear still makes the same shapes in the dark. It's not just in hospitals either. The office worker checking their reflection in the elevator glass before facing another day. The politician smoothing his expression before a speech. The teenager hiding behind a screen name. All of them, in small ways, are you. Each one building a little barrier between the world's breath and their own. The difference now is that no one admits it's a mask. They call it professionalism, confidence, persona. But you'd recognize the sound of the straps tightening just the same. The plague doctor wasn't a costume. It was a confession. Said, I am afraid, but I will still walk into the street. People today prefer prettier lies. They say, I am not afraid, and hope repetition will make it true. And yet, beneath the layers, beneath the calm tones, the careful smiles, the curated lives, every generation has the same question trembling in its chest. What happens if the air turns again? Maybe that's why your story survives. Not because people admire your science or even your courage, but because you turned fear into function. You gave shape to helplessness. You made terror look methodical. That's what people still crave. A way to make their panic productive. The mask endures in art and dream for that reason. Painters keep painting it. Writers keep resurrecting it. Psychologists use it as shorthand for repression. Photographers restage it with modern models, calling it commentary. Everyone projects their own disease onto it. Plague, war, isolation, identity. You've become the mirror no one wants to look away from. In the age of mirrors, the beak still works. It elongates the face, distances the eyes, erases the mouth. It creates the illusion that observation is neutral, that the watcher stands apart from what's seen. But that was never true, was it? You knew it then. The world keeps relearning it now. The observer is always infected by what he watches. Some nights you can almost imagine walking modern streets. The glass towers hum like hives. The air smells of electricity instead of rot. But the people move with the same hesitation you once saw in plague squares. They avoid eye contact in crowded spaces. They flinch at strangers' coughs. They build walls of sound around themselves. Music, voices, static, to muffle the world. Different century, same choreography. If they saw you walking among them, they'd take your picture first. Then they'd ask for an explanation. What does it mean? They'd say. You'd answer with the only truth that ever mattered. It means we're still learning how to live with fear, because that's what history really is, not progress, but repetition with slightly better shoes. It's easy now for people to think of plague doctors as curiosities, ghosts and beaks, props for masquerades, figures for festivals. But every mask tells the same story once you listen long enough. Behind every lens is a face that's forgotten how to stop watching. Behind every beak is someone trying to filter the world. And maybe that's the most human thing of all. To keep looking, even when the sight hurts. To keep breathing, even when the air feels wrong. To keep pretending the mask is for protection when it's really for endurance. That's why your legend keeps returning. Not because people believe in it, but because they recognize it. They see the beaked silhouette and feel that quiet flicker of recognition. Oh, there I am. Because everyone, at some point, becomes the doctor walking through the silent street, carrying a cane they don't know how to use, muttering advice they don't believe, pretending not to tremble. And in those moments, they understand the story wasn't about death at all. It was about persistence, about how the living, terrified and absurd, keep showing up anyway. The beak, the cloak, the gloves, they were never armor against contagion. They were armor against despair. And so the mask remains. unburied, unforgotten, hovering somewhere between symbol and mirror. Each generation puts it on for a moment, peers through its lenses, and whispers, "Is this what bravery feels like?" You'd know better. Bravery was never the point. Endurance was. Every civilization leaves behind two things: ruins and masks. The ruins tell what we built. The masks tell what we feared. When archaeologists dig through the layers of a dead city, they always find both: walls meant to protect, faces meant to hide. The difference really is only in material. Your mask, the beaked one, was made of leather and herbs. The modern ones are plastic and paper. But the idea is the same: containment. A fragile border between what we think of as ourselves and everything else that wants in. If you stood in the present world, you might not recognize it at first. The cobblestones are gone. The air smells of machines instead of wood smoke, and light itself has learned how to hum. Yet the rhythm of fear feels identical. People still chase certainty the way they once chased blessings. They still queue for cures, trade rumors, measure morality in precautions. They even use your words: contagion, immunity, quarantine, though now they pronounce them with the calm confidence of science, not prayer. And still the mask, always the mask. They make it thinner now, cheaper, more disposable, but it's the same gesture: face covered, eyes alert. You can almost see the echo of your own silhouette in their shadows as they pass each other on sidewalks, careful not to brush sleeves. You'd smile, probably, not with joy, but recognition. The future has perfected everything except peace of mind. In museums, your mask still waits behind glass. Children tug at their parents' hands and ask, "Why did they wear that?" The parents answer with gentle ignorance: "To keep the sickness away." They never explain the other sickness, the invisible one that grows inside a person when they realize how fragile breath really is. Fear, untreated, mutates. You saw it centuries ago. They see it now on screens. The docents speak of you as an artifact, not a person. They list the materials: waxed leather, brass-rimmed lenses, cotton stuffing, lavender, mint, and camphor. They call it protective gear. You might laugh at that word. Nothing ever protected you. The beak was hope sewn into shape, not a barrier. It filtered guilt more than air. Every so often, a visitor looks longer than the rest. A doctor, a nurse, someone who knows the sound of exhaustion too well. They stare through the glass until their reflection merges with yours. Two healers separated by centuries, both asking the same silent question: will it ever be enough? And then they move on because the answer has always been no. The world keeps learning that same lesson. It dresses it differently each time, but the story never changes. Disease, panic, recovery, forgetting. The forgetting is the crucial part. It's how the species survives, by erasing just enough of its own terror to start again. If humanity ever remembered everything it had endured, it might simply stop. But it doesn't. It builds new cities, new medicines, new distractions. It buries its dead and calls the act of rebuilding progress. And somewhere, in the cracks between the facts, the memory of you lingers, sometimes as warning, sometimes as metaphor. A man who faced the invisible and learned that the hardest part of surviving wasn't the infection but the silence afterward. In the centuries that followed your death, your legend scattered into fragments, half fact, half art. To some you became a relic of superstition. To others, a symbol of rational courage. The truth lived somewhere in between. A frightened man performing hope so convincingly that others believed it for a while. That, in the end, might be the real inheritance you left behind, the performance of calm. The practiced stillness that convinces others the world is not collapsing, even when it is. Modern doctors still wear it. Politicians, parents, teachers too. They've just replaced the beak with a smile. There's an old saying now: passed from one generation to the next. Keep calm, carry on. They print it on mugs and shirts. They think it's wisdom. You'd recognize it for what it is, a survival mantra for people who have forgotten they're afraid. And perhaps that's fine. Fear is meant to fade. If it didn't, no one would plant again after famine or love again after loss. Maybe the mask always had a second purpose, not just to keep air out, but to keep courage in. Look at the world now, centuries past your watch. There are satellites instead of stars, microscopes instead of candles, algorithms instead of prayers. Yet the core remains the same. People still wake in the middle of the night and listen for the sound of safety. They still mistake quiet for peace. They still build masks. Digital ones now, avatars, usernames, curated versions of themselves. They wear them to be seen without being touched, to speak without revealing the tremor in their voices. The beak is gone, but the impulse remains. Hide the face, keep the eyes, pretend control. You, of all people, would understand that evolution perfectly. The tools change, the need doesn't. The plague you faced was physical, but the one they face now is emotional. The contagion of loneliness, misinformation, fatigue. It spreads faster because it travels through thought instead of breath. And once again, humanity tries to cure it with performance. Good lighting, good posture, good lies. If you were here, you'd probably keep doing what you always did. Walk among them, take notes, offer the same quiet advice you once gave in alleys and doorways. Breathe slower. Don't let fear decide your shape. And maybe you'd remind them that the point was never to escape the sickness. It was to remember what kindness looked like in its shadow. That's what the mask really meant. Not fear, not superstition. Endurance wrapped around empathy. The willingness to step into the infected air because someone had to. It's easy now for people to laugh at your old uniform, the leather, the herbs, the absurd beak. But they forget the courage it took to wear it. They forget that progress always begins as ridicule. Centuries later, humanity still walks that narrow path between ignorance and understanding, hope and denial. It still calls that balance civilization. And though your body is long gone, your lesson remains intact, stitched invisibly into every act of care. That knowledge is not the opposite of fear, it's its translation. The beak has outlived the man. The story has outlived the fear, and maybe that's all survival ever meant. A mask that outlasts the panic. A gesture that keeps the world breathing. A memory shaped like a question mark walking through the fog. Every story, no matter how long it wanders, eventually circles back to silence. Yours begins and ends in the same place. A quiet room, a breath half held, the sound of the world waiting to see if it will go on. Outside, the centuries hum. The world has outgrown plague bells and candlelight, but not uncertainty. It has traded superstition for statistics, omens for headlines, incense for antiseptic. But if you listen closely, you can still hear the same pulse running underneath, the soft rhythm of fear pretending to be reason. Your mask sits now in a museum, yes, but not asleep. It watches. It has been watching for a very long time. Every morning, the curators unlock the glass case, wipe away the dust, adjust the lighting so it gleams just enough to unsettle. People file past, murmuring, laughing, shaking their heads. Some take pictures. Others move quickly, uneasy though they don't know why. They don't realize that they're seeing themselves, because the mask was never about death. It was about watching the living try to understand it. It was the reflection of everything that happens when a species too clever to stay innocent realizes how fragile its breath really is. And so you stand there still, black coat, long beak, glass eyes, caught between curiosity and confession. The placard beneath you reads, Plague Doctor's Mask, circa 1620. Believed to protect the wearer from miasma during outbreaks of bubonic plague. symbol of early medical practice. It's not wrong. It's just incomplete. They don't mention the trembling hands that tied the straps, or the sweat trapped under the leather, or the prayers muttered before entering the house with the chalked X on the door. They don't mention the small mercies, the patient who smiled before dying, the child who took your hand without flinching, the neighbor who left bread on your doorstep and never spoke of it. History never has time for tenderness. But you remember. You always do. That's your curse and your purpose, the endless remembering. When the last visitor leaves, the museum grows quiet. The hum of lights fades. The air settles. The glass reflects only its own emptiness. And in that stillness, you almost come alive again. The beak tilts ever so slightly toward the empty hallway, as if listening. The air shifts. You can almost smell it: lavender, mint, dust, and time. If ghosts exist, they are not made of souls. They are made of repetition. Every generation conjures you when the air turns dangerous again. You are the reminder, the ritual, the reassurance that someone has faced this before. And perhaps that's all you ever were. A promise that even when the world loses its breath, it can still whisper. Because you, the plague doctor, were never really a man. You were an instinct wearing a hat, a habit shaped like hope, the human desire to do something, anything, while the world burned. You became the shape of endurance, the posture of perseverance, the quiet, anonymous silhouette that says, "We are not finished yet." That's why they still paint you, still film you, still use your likeness in art, games, and stories. You're not a warning anymore. You're a comfort, a symbol of how even in our worst hours, someone stayed. Someone showed up. That's what people forget when they talk about you as myth or relic. They forget the simplest truth. You walked into sickness when everyone else hid. You counted, recorded, tried. You failed, of course, but failure done with mercy is just another form of faith. And so the mask endures because the world still needs it. Some nights, the museum guards swear they hear footsteps after closing, slow, measured, soft on the stone floors. They find nothing, of course, except the faint smell of herbs and a door left slightly ajar. They laugh about it over coffee. But later, when one of them wakes from a dream of coughing streets and distant bells, they understand. You were never haunting the museum. You were keeping watch, because that's all you ever did. In the darkness between disasters, someone must stay awake, a silent witness to the fact that the world has not yet ended. Someone must listen for the first breath of dawn after a long night of fever. That's your duty still. Not to cure, not to judge, but to remember. And so you wait. You wait through centuries of calm, through glass and electric light, through laughter that forgets to be careful. You wait through peace and progress and the small arrogance of comfort. You wait because you know what the air can do when it changes its mind. You wait because someone has to be the first to hear the silence. And when that silence returns, because it always does, you'll be ready again. Not as savior, not as prophet, not even as man. Just as a shape, familiar and steady, reminding the living that fear can be faced politely. You'll open the door. You'll step out into whatever century this is. The world will flinch and then it will follow. And maybe for a while that will be enough. The bell will ring once more. The air will thicken. The masks will multiply. And somewhere in the trembling light of a single candle, the legend will breathe again. Quietly, faithfully, absurdly alive. Because death is patient, but so is endurance. And so you wait. You always wait. The last watcher in a world that never quite learns. Standing still while history coughs itself awake.